On this edition of In the Gun, it's time to take an in-depth look at the WVU defense with a guy who has coached, who has consulted, who has written books on defense. We've got a fun guest for you on this edition of ITG.
Let's go!
You are now watching Believe. Do you believe?
Go single! Joe, nuts!
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
Oh, there's nobody that hates Pitt in this world as much as I do. Pat Narduzzi, who's such a blowhard. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
250-pound lumbering Owen Schmidt, almost a folk hero here for West Virginia.
Had some moonshine, had the good vibes going.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
They come out in cover one. He kind of knew where he was going with the football because of the alignment of the safety.
Closely defended there, but a really nice throw by Garrett Green.
I love it!
You're in the right place. You are In the Gun.
Because once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 174 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Euler, flanked by the best teammate in the business, the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And as always, this episode of ITG brought to you in part by our friends at BetOnline, where the game starts. And we are getting closer and closer to the game starting, to that Labor Day weekend showdown against those Penn State Nittany Lions. And today we have a special guest, Cody Alexander, Jed, who, has quite literally written the book on defense. In fact, 6 of those books. He's going to join us to take a in-depth look at the Mountaineers defensive unit here on this edition of ITG.
I should put a warning at the beginning of this episode. Anytime you talk to Cody, it's going to be waist deep, not knee deep, in scheme, X's and O's. This is going to be a 400 level football conversation. So if that's not what you're looking for, move on to the next episode, because
if you just started watching football this year, maybe wait a little bit on this.
That's right. Yeah, he's a very well respected film rat. He's served time on FBS staffs. He's coached in Texas. He's a well respected film rat in football junkie and football geek circles. He's a guy that I've communicated with through the years. We've compared notes on just different things schematically and otherwise. But I always thought it would be a great idea for the football junkies out in the crowd, because we think that's kind of what drives our fan base on this show, maybe more so than some of the others. We get a little more out in the weeds with the X's and O's side of things. And that's what Cody's all about. Cody is great at really taking you for a ride, and he'll provide some context. He won't completely leave you behind, but
Sure.
He's going to be talking shorthand. He's going to be talking fast. And we're going to talk about what West Virginia, he's watched some tape and what he's seen defensively. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait as well. I know how excited you are for this one. Listen, we've had a lot of different guests in the history of ITG, and sometimes we're all kind of involved. Like the Charles Wesley Godwin episode, you and I kind of stayed out of the way and let Owen do his thing. And I got a feeling this is going to be one of those ones where I kind of stay out of your way and sit back and take notes as you two have these 400 level, maybe even PhD level football conversations here in just a minute. So I am looking forward to that.
I'll close with this and you can throw the break. There's going to be points because he's all in on the defensive side of the football.
Sure,
I'm an old quarterback. Yeah, I studied defense, but the way Cody sees a grease board, it's upside down to me. So he's going to be talking 400 level when I'm thinking 200 or 300 level. I'm not a 400 level defensive guy. I'm an offensive guy, right? But this is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well, too. Of course, this edition of ITG, our conversation coming up here with Cody Alexander, also brought to you in part by our friends at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Big shout out to our buddy JR and everyone there at Team Toothman. And real quick, Jed, before we go to break, a brief little around campus shout out, I should say, to the 5 Mountaineers who were drafted in this past week in the MLB draft. Of course, JJ Weatherholt, 7th overall to the Cardinals, but 5 Mountaineers in total taken in the MLB draft this season. And overall, that makes 42 Mountaineers drafted in Randy Mazey's tenure from 2013 to 2024. Pretty stinking cool. So a cool way for Randy Mazey to go out with that many guys being drafted. And a big good luck and congratulations to those guys as they all go and try and carve out their Major League Baseball careers.
Probably could have been more, but you had some opt out because they have aspirations of playing in Omaha before their pro career. But yeah, great point on your part.
Yep, absolutely. So shout out to those 5 Mountaineers. We know you'll continue to make us proud at the next level. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Cody Alexander breaking down the Mountaineer defense on the other side. Some 400 level football when we return. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
ITG will return after these messages.
Connects with Cole Taylor. Taylor dives to the end zone. Touchdown, West Virginia. 43 yards.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
If you work the land, you just got to be a jack of all trades type. There's just too much to do. So if you got to be a welder or a farmer or a ditch digger, that's just who you are that day. Then tomorrow, you can be somebody else.
Get your Coyote at the new location of Johnston Equipment between Weston and Buckhannon.
On here, and we've got a special guest for you on this special edition of ITG as we take a deep dive, a 400 level, maybe a PhD level look at the WVU defense. Now, joining us is Cody Alexander. He is the owner of MatchQuarters.com. Cody, thank you so much for taking some time to be here in the gun with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I know.
Yeah,
Jed has been. Yeah. See, I mean, he's jumping the gun here real quick. You know,
I'm chomping
normally,
a bit, yeah.
normally I got to give him the alley oop here. You know, but he just wants to slam dunk this thing and get moving. I know Jed has been excited to talk with you, like we've kind of teed up for everybody. There will be some football terms and lingo here. This will be a conversation that will be a little high level in some ways. And I know Jed is excited to pick your brain on all these X's and O's. So thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, Mountaineer fans, I was kind of explaining, Cody, in the opening segment in the tease. You're only Kardashian famous within the circle of film rats, right? And football geeks. And that's those of us who are in that space and in that world really appreciate what you do and the value that you bring and the insight and how you break things down. So I've been looking forward for a long time to try and coordinate this. You and I first touched base about it, first of the year, really, in January. And so here we are in mid-July, but I'm glad to get it up and running. I wanted to get you in here and really let's get granular. We're going to start more superficial, big picture, but we're going to get pretty deep on the West Virginia defensive side of the football. We're going to talk about some of the influences of the staff, some of what you've seen on tape. But when you look at this staff, one of the things I was discussing with you during the break is, okay, when Vic Koenig left following the 2019 season, Jordan Lesley took over as the full-time defense coordinator. instead of just position coach. And that's the year that we led the country in pass defense. We had a lot of things going on. Then you kind of fast forward into 2021, 2022, like a lot of schools in our stratosphere, those are the years that we were kind of ambushed by the portal and this new age of NIL. We needed to recalibrate. We didn't know how to handle it. We lost some key guys, especially on the defensive back end. Once we recalibrated, once we got the trust in order and stabilized some things, now you can start tailoring towards something. But you know better than anybody, Cody, when you think of Jordan Lesley, a guy that played and coached at Troy, the defensive scheme that he is his pedigree comes in. It's more of an even front four-man configuration with that hybrid pass rusher to the boundary side. Think DeMarcus Ware, now NFL Hall of Famer DeMarcus Ware, dating all the way back to the early 2000s at Troy. That's what Jordan comes from. But last year, you started to see them lean into more of an odd front configuration. Now, we're going to put a lot of labels on these things, but at the end of the day, whether you want to call it even front 3-4 or odd front 3-4 or even front 4-2-5, whatever you want to call it, it's some version of a defensive alignment that's going to have a hybrid pass defender to the field, to the wide side, and that's strong safety, which is kind of the old school, even front 4-3 sandbacker, but now just more athletic. And then to the boundary, you have that edge rusher who once in a while will be asked in limited coverage to drop into space, but to the boundary. So what have you seen? I want to hear you let's get wide. I want to give you a wide berth. What have you seen starting off watching tape of West Virginia defensively in the last handful of years?
Yeah, they're really aligned with what a lot of teams are trying to do, especially in that Big 12 universe, the G5 universe. Most of the SEC right now is trying to go to 12 personnel. They're starting to move back to four-man fronts, which is that's typically the natural evolution there. And really, just before we begin, there is a natural ebb and flow within football. I wrote about it. I actually wrote a book about it. It's called Hybrids, where there's a cyclical nature within football where offenses will get small. They spread everybody out. Defenses get small. To match that, offenses get big. The thing that we're seeing, and primarily in the NFL, and it's trickling down now back into college, is the use of 12 personnel, the use of hybrid tight ends. And that's because there's so many of these like hybrid defenses. We saw the 3 high explosion. I think everybody experimented with it. Even Georgia. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Dan Laney, about like, hey, that was the only thing, we experimented with it. That was the only thing that we thought we could do back when, the Joe Burrow and LSU Tigers, they had all Jamar Chase and all those guys. And then you have, so that whole SEC saw that with that whole influx of air raid. So to fast forward to what we're seeing here is this defense really has been a cornerstone defense for a lot of teams for a lot of years, and really for the past decade. The root of this is called the East Coast 3-4. And if you watch Baylor and bringing in another Big 12 team, it's basically a cousin to what Dave Aranda does and what Ron Roberts was trying to do. It's a tight front, meaning that you're going to plug the gaps. It can shift into a 4-down under front, which just means you're setting the 3 technique to your hybrid edge, so that hybrid defensive end doesn't have to fill a B. You don't want him moving into the B gap. You want him able to rush the passer or drop. And so right, exactly. Like you mentioned earlier, I mean, think of it like the old school Lawrence Taylor, where you want him to be always on the edge. You want him to have a pass rush, but you want to cover that guard or that B gap. So it's a one-on-one with the tackle. And so that's usually what you're going to see inside. What they have added really, and I think it's interesting, last year they were 5th in the Power 5 in middle of the field disguise. So what that means is a lot of times they were going to show you a 2-high shell. So meaning that the 2 safeties on the hash, but that was not what they were going to run most of the time, about 34% of the time. So a third of the plays, when what you saw pre-snap, it was going to look completely different post-snap. And that was the 5th highest rate. So they've added an element to it. I think you mentioned it kind of when we were talking about it, that this is more of a personnel issue and not a scheme issue. The scheme is there, especially when you see it, but they struggled against the run pretty much this year, which a lot of times when you're an odd front team, if you just don't have the guys inside, you're giving up a lot of angles. So think about a down block, right? We probably all know what a down block is. You're going to work to the next guy over, and I'm going to work down on you. In fact, you're giving the angle to the offensive lineman. And so in these tight front, you have issues with a lot of gap scheme. I think when I was watching against TCU, they really struggled against counter against TCU. And then again, that would show up like UCF runs a lot of gap scheme, obviously, because it's Gus Malzahn, so it's gap scheme all the time. Gap scheme just means like power counter. You're pulling a guard. And those are issues you see in the tight front. So just in terms of a front alignment, that's what we're talking about, is that we're clogging the B gaps. We're taking away those B gap bubbles. So we're limiting RPO usage. We're limiting zone usage because we're going to plug those. The running back can't find the B gap. And then we're, like you mentioned earlier, we're going to have a nickel who is either a third safety or a corner that likes to tackle, who's going to play
depending on down and distance. Yeah.
Right. Depending on down. And a lot of teams, not necessarily at the college level, but at the NFL level, you'll have like a big nickel, and then you have like your regular nickel. And a lot of these guys are just repurposed corners. And so that's a specialty position. Really, the fulcrums of your defense here are going to be your nickel and your boundary safety, because those are your overhangs, meaning that they're the force players outside. They're the next guys out, right? And so those are all your turnback players. So just to throw a lot at you, that if I was to give you 3 bullet points to wrap everything up, what is this defense? It's a tight base, 2 high shell with multiple disguise coverages. And then we're going to run simulated pressures, meaning that we're going to run 4 people at you at all times, but you don't know where they're coming from. So it looks like a pressure or like a 5 or a 6-man pressure, but it's really not. It's really only 4.
That's a lot of pure gold right there. I mean, that's a great opener, because even those 2 positions that you alluded to, when you think of both those safety positions, one of the field, one of the boundary, they have to have a skill set. Yep. That they can play in space, but also they possess the physicality to kind of be creatures of the box. But you mentioned rolling the coverage. Let me explain to the fans why that matters. Okay, let's jump back to the offensive side. You're on the dark side, Cody. I'm on the light side of the force here. You always have an upside down grease board when I look at it. I'm like, hey, flip that thing around. But the old quarterback, let's talk about why that matters. Okay, there's certain rules that quarterbacks abide by based on the coverage they think they're seeing. In other words, they project out, hey, this is cover 2. Hey, this is cover 4. If you're seeing quarters, you might read the flat differently than if you're seeing a straight cover 2, or if you're seeing a cover 3, a 1 high safety look. And what Cody's talking about is pre-snap will present one way, making the quarterback think we're in this list of coverages that have a 2 high shell. But in fact, once the ball's snapped, we're going to violate that quarterback's rules by rolling to a single high. And the other thing that I wanted you to respond to here, did you notice anything? And I don't know what games you watched, Cody, but one of the things that happened, and you mentioned it, sometimes odd front teams struggle against the run. If you don't have the war daddies up front, that's just the nature of it, right? Well, we were kind of blessed last year. We went deeper than we thought we would with 8 to 9 serviceable at the point of attack, serviceable guys. But what happened to us as a team that likes to chop up the front as much as we do, we lost a starting backer that was a heck of a player in that TCU game. So we had to start all of a sudden. Ben Cutter, as a true freshman, is our starting Will, sometimes playing Mike. And we're trying to chop up the front. He doesn't understand all the run fits. So a couple games after that, you saw that early in the season, mid-season. So we addressed that by simplifying things with those run fits. He was seeing such a murky and cloudy picture that we were missing some fits. Is that something you saw on tape later in the year that was addressed?
Yeah, so West Virginia's stunt rate was actually 24th in the Power 5. So they're in the top third of people, and all that means is they moved a lineman without bringing the pressure. Anytime you do that, you are opening the door for a mistake. Either your linebacker doesn't rock back to the gap, he doesn't put his foot where it's supposed to, he kind of overstacks the back, his defensive lineman, his anchor point. So now he's kind of out leveraged, or you get washed out. I mean, just for purposes, so people know, I worked at Baylor under Phil Bennett in our brawls back in 11, 12, and 13. In fact, the worst football game I've ever attended was the basketball
I know
game
where this is going.
with Geno Smith and that whole crew of receivers.
That was the best game I attended my time as a student at WVU. I mean,
I thought we were all gonna get fired on our way back. But we were very stunt heavy, and what the problem you have, and then again, what you get exacerbated by a 3 down front is that if it doesn't hit, or you get washed, or you get pinned, you're going to be a gap short. And like you said, it makes total sense when you put 2 and 2 together with, we're stunt heavy in the front, and then we lose our linebacker who's a stud, and we have to play a freshman who's just learning, was probably not, we were going to ease him into it. Now all of a sudden he has to start, and we're learning by fire. And so a lot of the times with the gap schemes and things like that, if you don't hit the stunt right, and this defense is already stunt heavy. Like, the whole premise of this is stunt heavy anyway. It's simulated pressure based, meaning that we're really only going to ever send 4, but you're going to get all those stunts with it. So it makes perfect sense to me about that. And to go back to what you were talking about with the coverage disguise, one of the evolutions in the game right now is RPOs are not novel anymore. I mean, you could probably go to your local elementary school and talk to like a 5th grader and be like, hey, do you know what an RPO is? And that kid would probably be able to tell you what it is. So it's become a norm in the vernacular and then also within the game. So what we're actually seeing is more play action. So these are more designed passes that are built to really ultimately make that conflict player move. And so then the quarterback's just going to throw. So going back to the disguise, what you were saying, and this is also part of, you have stunts in the front, you have coverage disguises in the back. And a lot of times your coverage in your front is divorced, meaning that they're doing different things. So these guys have to know where to fit at all times. So it's not just the backer and the line need to know where they got to go and every gap is filled, but it's also the safety's got to know. And so with the quarterback, when I do play action, and primarily as we see more under center or pistol, is I'm actually turning my back to the secondary, and then all of a sudden I have to recalibrate. Well, that is hesitation, and hesitation, as we all know, spells death for the quarterback.
Yep, it sure does. Yeah. And you talked about most of the pressure is going to come in the form of 4-man pressure. No matter how you present pre-snap, you're going to chop up the front, as you said, 24th in the country, in terms of stunts, and you're going to bring somebody behind it. Now, the question offensively is, who's that 4th rusher going to be? You don't always have the answer. The numbers bear that out, Cody. When you look at West Virginia last year, for the first time since joining the Big 12 in that 2012 season that you mentioned, we led the Big 12 in sacks. Now, the breakdown of those 33 sacks for West Virginia, 21 of those were out of 4-man pressures. 30 of them were out of 4- and 5-man pressures. So that's really been what this is all about. And now West Virginia has had a recruiting cycle after leaning into this East Coast 3-4 to try and address some of these specialty positions and enhance them a little bit. You have, for instance, we had an FCS pass rusher stud from Gardner-Webb, Ty French, record setter. We brought him in. He's going to help out with Tyron Bradley's taking another step, both playing that bandit position, that weak side edge rusher position. TJ Jackson, transfer from Troy, very versatile, explosive kid with burst. He can get up the field after you, boundary tackle probably, but you can move him across the front. So now you've started to address some personnel to fit into some of these creeper looks and sim pressures that you're talking about.
Yeah, and so just if there's people that are like, what's a creeper and what's a simulated pressure, a lot of times these things are synonymous depending on who you talk to. It can also be very semantic and dogmatic depending on who you talk to. I think the easiest way that I've explained it is a creeper is typically a 2nd level defender or even a 3rd level defender. So this is your nickel, this is your safety, this is even your outside linebacker, but they're hitting the perimeter. They're creeping down to the box and then they go off the edge. Arnsparger back with the Killer Bees and the 53 defense all the way back in the 70s that's who invented this defense.
I can't tell you, my heart's just fluttering. I'm telling you, these are the kind of conversations I love. You're talking Arnsparger in the 70s.
Yes.
This is the best. Yeah.
So he created what's called a safe pressure, or then what it evolved into what's called a replacement pressure. So I'm bringing one guy, I'm replacing him in the secondary with a guy opposite of him. This then goes to Dick LeBeau, who is like this guy at LSU, Arnsparger, who won a bunch of, was with the Dolphins, is still doing this. So he went and then he was like, what if we add secondary players? So if you think of like old school Steelers stuff, like 90s Steelers, you think of like safeties and corners blitzing off the edge, like Rod Woodson just murdering people.
Barnell Lake, baby.
Yeah. So all of that. So you keep going further, then Dave Aranda gets a hold of this, and you start getting guys that are creating all of these creeper. And then a simulated pressure really is just more or less we're simulating pressure with internal. And so, or it's just a blanket term for anything where we are making it look like it's a 5-man, 6-man pressure, but then we're only sending 4. And to your point about West Virginia's blitzing, they were 3rd lowest in the Power 5 last year in 5-man pressure rate. So they are a simulated pressure base. And so, and that's why I keep an eye on them, is because they always have pretty good blitz pass. I'm always interested in guys that run a lot of simulated pressures, because it's kind of hard. You only have 4 guys, and then that's where you get a lot of the coverage disguise and a lot of the things off of that that are built on this defense.
Yeah, there's so many things you're saying here that for instance, you talked about the disconnect from the defensive front to the defensive secondary. Right. It seemed like when Gary Patterson was at TCU, I spent a whole segment in the pregame, every TCU game, explaining how that worked and how that functioned. And now you're talking about Dave Aranda and what he does at Baylor with these sim pressures. I mean, when I think sim pressure, that's of course who I think of first.
Yes.
I think of Ron Roberts and Dave Aranda. And if you're listening at home or if you're watching, just consider it like this. If you don't have the resources or the money to get a top 10 pick edge rusher, or if you don't have a Warren Sapp 3-technique disruptor from the interior as a pass rusher, well, you have to get creative. And what you have to do is use scheme to compensate for that personnel that doesn't match up to maybe some of the top tier SEC schools. So what you're going to do is, and Cody's done a great job explaining this, if you're going to bring 4 guys, it might look like 5 guys are coming. So you're going to force the offense to spend resources to one side, but in turn, those resources will be wasted in pass protection because those 5 guys aren't coming, only 4. Think back, Mountaineer fans, think back to the game winner against Baylor this year. This very thing happened when we hit that wheel route to Jaheim. What happened was you had the Will Backer for Baylor show a blitz posture. He bailed into the weak flat. He should have had deep third help, but didn't. So it ended up with a foot race because that corner, for some reason, he showed bail coverage and he matched off on our X. Did you see that, Cody?
Yeah.
And he came to the interior. So we had that entire deep third was voided. So that Will Backer, who initially looked like he was blitzing, which Dave Aranda loves to do, he presents with these simulated pressures. Now, he brought pressure from elsewhere, but not that Will Backer. He dropped, and he's the one that Jaheim ran right past. But this has become a very big part of football, and you're doing a great job explaining it.
Yeah, and this is kind of the norm in college football. If you're not going to play a 3-high system, you're going to end up playing some sort of a tight front or a hybrid 4-down front that really gets post snap. It's going to fit like an odd front. That we are so into defenses now are so hybrid in nature that you almost have to physically ask the coach, how are you fitting the run? Are you fitting it as an odd spacing, meaning that we're going to close the B gaps? We've got essentially we're going to play it just like if we had 2 3s or a 4s. That way they're inside the B gaps, and then we're fitting it almost like a 5-man lineman. Or are you playing it like an even front where you're leaving an open B gap? So that's, because you have teams like, in West Virginia is a good example of this. You'll look out there and they'll be in a 4-down front, and you're like, wait, I thought, this year you'll be like, wait, Coach Alexander told me that we're a tight front defense, and I spent, I'm researching, I'm trying to get this. And then you're like, they come out in the 4-down front. It's the same thing. It's just a different presentation for the offense. They're still going to fit it. A lot of times what you see is, I call it a lag front or a reduction front, meaning that a lot of times what you're going to do is, if I get a base block, so the lineman shows his numbers and face to me, I'm actually going to try and work to his backside. I'm going to lag off of that block. I'm going to let him feel like he's reaching me, and I'm going to work backside. And so all the linebackers do is they stack their anchor points, and once they get the fallback, then they're going to work off the running back. And so to me, we're in such a state where it's never been harder to figure out what you're running defensively as a fan. Which is why I think there's so much interest in the defensive side of football now, is because people are like, wait, there's a lot going on. My wife is even said, she's like, I had no idea that there was so much stuff going on. And I'm like, yeah, the defense is not just anymore. Because even going back to like the early, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, when we were killing everybody at Baylor on offense, that's because a lot of those defenses were static. What you saw, that's what you got. If it was a 4-2-5 like Gary Patterson, the worst thing they might do is move the line. You know what I mean? So it's like you've got
stationary target,
right? And so you get these and that's why I think it's amazing. Like a guy like Pat Narduzzi has lasted this long. It just goes to show how good of a coach he is, and the player development they always seem to have really good corners, which always helps. But playing kind of a static nature of a defense on early downs. Nowadays, I mean, we're talking about middle of the field disguise, simulated pressures. Are you an even front that runs odd spacing? Are you an odd front that runs even spacing? It's just like, it goes on and on. My wife's always like, how can you still come up with content? And I'm like, this right here.
It's endless.
It's endless.
It's funny you mentioned Narduzzi, because as a West Virginia guy, every time I find myself having a bad day, all I do is take the Oklahoma State game at Heinz Field in 2017 with Mason Rudolph and watch the first half. And my day is suddenly made better when it's 49-14 at intermission. But when you talk about sometimes seeing the 4 down, even though we're a 3-down base, I mean, again, you get into personnel now. So let's talk about the 2 different specialized players in that spur/bandit position. One of those guys, Cody, is 6'2", 257 pounds. Okay. So yeah, he can hold the edge and set things to the boundary against the run game. The other guy, the pass rushing specialist, Ty French, 6'1", 234. So they come in all shapes and sizes. But you mentioned something too that made me think. You talked about the pistol a bit ago, and that's something else that defenses, including West Virginia's, now more than ever have to contend with. I mean, it was isolated in Nevada. Nobody else was really doing it. But now it's also incredibly mainstream. And here's why that matters. One more problem for defenses. I want you to talk about this. West Virginia defensively is facing it, and West Virginia offensively with Neal is using it. Because defenses oftentimes like to set their front to where the back is.
Yes.
In other words, if you're lined up in the shotgun, you'll designate your front or the assignments of what you're trying to do defensively at the point of attack based on which side of the quarterback that running back is set to. When he's in the pistol, that's one more thing you have to guess at.
Yeah, and I think it's a give and a take, because offensively you're essentially closing off one whole side of the field, but then you're also adding an element of where we can run stretch. Most offensive guys will tell you, outside of like the high school, or if you're like at a lower level school and you just happen to have like some SEC burnout that shows up and is just faster than everybody, like stretch from the gun is not great. Most offensive linemen will tell you they hate it. Running backs don't really like it either. But when I can get a direct angle and I can make a cutback, it just makes everything flow a little nicer. This is why wide zone, right? And this is why wide zone has become so much popular in the NFL. And this is that trickle down effect. The boot action stuff, it's just so funny, because I grew up in Kansas City, so about 2 hours away from Nebraska. We ran the Nebraska power eye, so power counter boot, throw in a little belly G, run a little bit of lead option, and you were cooking, And so like that's where I grew up. My dad, who's been an offensive coordinator forever, was always like power counter boot, power counter boot. Well, now with that pistol, you get more of a downhill element. And so defenses, like I was going back with RPOs, defenses have gotten so used to the horizontal flow of run games where it's zone cutback, it's stretch cutback, it's more of these elongated gap schemes where we're actually logging power. We're not really trying to get it. This isn't North Dakota State where we're really, or even K-State where we're running A gap power. right? And so that changes the way that you want to structure your calls. When I get more of a downhill run game, I have to meet that downhill run game with a downhill blitz path. So all of my simulated pressures or my creepers from the edge don't necessarily work right now unless I'm targeting some sort of a boot action or we're trying to cut off the stretch play. You know, it changes your whole game plan. And so for the pistol, that's where that factor comes in. And like you also, just to go back, you can't set your defense to the running back anymore.
So in other words, if you're facing a heavy stretch team like West Virginia is, we might anticipate defenses using some of those sim pressures to try and outflank the stretch portion of the outside zone and force it back inside and anticipate defensive numbers so you can kind of outnumber them there. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so I call that force motion. So we're actually trying to go against the grain of the offense. So I'm okay if my and this is going to sound sacrilegious, but I'm okay with my D lineman getting zoned by the lineman as long as they can ricochet off the next guy. So what I'm trying to do is send edge pressure. I'm reducing the front away from it. You're moving towards me. A lot of times, especially at the college level, that tackle will just grab the edge as he's coming across his face. Well, that shortens the edge for my edge defender that's blitzing, but then also who's blocking him? Your tackle never fanned out. And then on top of that, if I can ricochet off the next interior offensive lineman, then I'm now getting pushed to the running back. And so it makes a lot of sense to, if you can guess correctly where the stretch is going to go, like, do they really like running it to the tight end? Do they like hitting you on the weak side? If you can figure that out, especially in the tight front, a lot of times they just want to run it to the nickel because it's a soft edge. So they're running to the soft edge. So if I can bring the nickel and then I can reduce the line, now I've got it. And so they're like, well, what if they run like regular, like mid zone or regular zone? Well, now I'm moving it, you're moving away. I mean, I can bring different guys. Like I can fold the edge rusher back inside. You know, now my linebackers can really fast flow into gaps. So to me, that's kind of that cat and mouse game that you get with pistol, is where do you want the pressure to come from? So yeah, the offense, and the thing with what I mean by they eliminate half the field is in the shotgun, you have a full plane of view as a quarterback. You can see, as long as wherever your periphery is, you have a full range of motion. So you can actually RPO any side or read a defender on any side of the back. RPOs don't always have to be ran to the back. They can be, I call them flop reads. So I can actually read the defender away. And a lot of times in gun, and you alluded to this, is that they will set the front or like put a 3 technique in the B gap to the running back, right? Okay, well then the open B gap or the open C gap, where if I'm in a tight front, the edge defender has to fill that alley, right? He has to fill that gap. So I can actually make him a conflict defender. And a lot of times, the way that modern defense is set up is that if I have the running back to me, I'm passive, right? I'm just going to pat my feet if I'm the overhang. If the running back's away from me, I can fast flow. I'm going to go hammer that hole shut because I know that it's not going to be an RPO. So like in shotgun, you almost have to have 2 passive players, because if you're too quick, that quarterback can just sit there, see you, and he can flop read it off of it. In pistol, you can't, because of the mechanics of it. In pistol, you can't. I've got to fully turn sideways. So I've completely lost half of the field. So you can actually be more aggressive on defense when you're playing a pistol team. Another thing with offense is you'll see against pistol teams, they'll be really pressure heavy than they normally would against a gun. And it goes back to usually you get downhill run, but then also if I blitz away from the running back, you can't see me. So there's no way you can actually get an RPO read and you have no idea that I'm blitzing from the opposite end, hand it to the running back, and he runs right into an edge pressure. So that to me, the pistol game, that's where the next evolution of defense has been, because like you said, we were so field boundary heavy pre-2010s. Then everybody kind of RPO becomes normal. Everybody's running the shotgun. NFL's complaining because, nobody knows how to play football anymore. And then we get back into like now with the 2020s and everybody has some sort of it. Now everybody's going back to pistol, more under center stuff. And so it's changing the way that you're playing. So now you have to be not necessarily field boundary. Now everything then went to everything's predicated off the back. Then now everything's kind of back to field boundary just because of where we are with the football.
And, you mentioned when that defensive end particularly, he's going to be more passive when the back sets his way, and not just in the RPO game, but even in the zone read game. I mean, that makes perfect sense. He's almost anticipating that quarterback to come out of the belly and read his pinch or scoop or slide. But when you talk about the history of what we're getting into here, that's my favorite part of it. You can go all the way back to Lombardi. He used to call, when everybody else was man blocking, he first started tinkering with zone concepts, calling it doodad blocking. I'm sure you know that. But he was using zone concepts with Jim Taylor in the 60s. And fast forward up to the Broncos and what they were doing with Terrell Davis and Alex Gibbs running the stretch play from under center. Yep. And here we are. It's become such a different animal out of the gun, out of the pistol. It's West Virginia's bread and butter. But let's segue into this. I can't let you get out of here without getting your thoughts on this. I think what West Virginia has leaned into defensively, philosophically, it's a good fit for us historically, at least in recent history. Anytime that you're going to lean into an odd front configuration, a 3-down front. Now, like you said, everybody's multiple, and you're going to have some elements of a 4-down mixed into it. But if your base concepts are 3-down, West Virginia, for the better part of the last quarter century, I mean, if you look at Jeff Castile and Tony Gibson, we run in the odd stack.
Yep.
Okay. Now we're moving into a 3-4. 3-4 is a completely different animal. That's time for another episode than the odd stack, right? Completely different animal. But I'll tell you where they're alike. They're alike in this sense. When you're at West Virginia, it's very difficult. It's supremely difficult for most places, unless you're Alabama, Georgia, and maybe a couple others, Ohio State, to recruit enough of those war daddies to truly hold a 4-down front with depth. That's difficult to do. But what you can do in numbers is recruit those hybrid, as you talked about, second and third level players, those linebacker DB types. And that gets you in position to be more creative defensively. Plus, it helps because those are also the body types that tend to populate your special teams units. Yep. So I think it's traditionally been a good fit for West Virginia with our recruiting limitations or resource limitations.
No, and I totally agree. And really, there is an evolution back to more of a 4-down front. We're seeing it in the SEC, and a lot of it just has to do with that's where a lot of the defensive linemen are tending to come out of. I mean, it's just like you said with recruiting base. Ohio State runs even with him. Glenn was running a odd stack really at Oklahoma State. He goes to Ohio State. He has some of that 3-high element in his coverages, but he's running a 4-down front. When you have premium defensive linemen, you'll run a 4-down front. It's just because you spread your anchor points out. It allows you to move guys around. You really only see like a Saban the past couple of years really was only running tight front against 10 personnel. Like if you went 4 open, he would get in 10 personnel and he would just move Will Anderson down inside because that just shows you how good Will Anderson was. He could play all the way from wide all the way into a 4-high. So you have those guys, and I agree with you. And this defense actually is built from like that App State tree, Troy tree of where we're getting guys either coming, they're kind of like second tier guys, or they're transfer level guys where if we hit on a guy, sweet. If not, we are at least athletic enough that we can kind of mitigate some of the issues. We can use movement against some of these bigger offensive linemen, like maybe, use kind of smoke and mirrors and game plan a little bit more than just say here and say, hey, let's just sit and get, and let's just play base defense, because that's really been the thing. I think everybody kind of understands Georgia at this point with all the defensive talent that they've had in the past couple of years. They're a 5-man pressure team. Why? Because they have 4 elite defensive linemen and they're too deep at it. And then they have a guy like Quay Walker who can be the 5th guy that rushes. So it's like choose your poison. And now we're going to get 1-on-1. And so to me, that's kind of where the simulated pressure thing comes in. And you alluded to this earlier in the show. One of the things that you can do with the simulated pressure is you can change the math for the defense in the secondary. So if I can get the running back or even leave me the tight end in. So now I've got 7 guys and I only sent 4. I mean, think about it. Now I have 7 guys in coverage. The offense can only send 5 guys out. So if they eliminate 1 guy and I got 7 guys in coverage, that's a +3 for me. If I can get the tight end and the running back to stay in, that's it. Now I'm really getting that plus advantage in there. And that to me is why teams run this. Teams like West Virginia, TCU's in the same boat. Baylor's in the same boat. Really, a lot of the Big 12 teams. It's the reason why the Big 12 is kind of the land of the odd stack and the land of the tight front is because they're all dealing with kind of the same things and the same recruiting processes and the same philosophies defensively. And then you got to deal with pretty much the best offensive coordinators for the most part in the entire country. And it's always been a quarterback centric and offensive centric league. And so these defenses match up really well with that.
I got one more question for you. And what I'm going to do is, Wes, we're going to come up for breath, come up for air here. Do you have any plugs or do you have a question or I felt like we had grease pens in our hand there,
Yeah, absolutely. You guys both need a breather. I mean, you need a quick commercial break here or something so you can grab some water and talk to Coach, although no adjustments needed. Just keep doing what you're doing. A thank you to our friends at Fortis, the best commercial roofing business in the country. Big shout out to our guy, Rick Lewis, for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. And a big thank you as well to our new friends at Johnston Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of this episode of ITG. Make sure you're stopping by their newest location on Route 33 just outside of Weston.
So you talked about the evolution of football, just the very nature of it. It tends to evolve. The old returns to be the new. I like how you explained that with smaller athletic defensive players being replaced by bulky offensive players and turn the defense responds. I think, but when you say that, I think back to Jimmy Johnson's Miami teams. He was really the first guy to go undersized and sacrifice that size for guys athletic enough to go sideline to sideline. And that was dominant for a decade until the offense responded. And here comes the defense again. Well, what you've seen play out in the Big 12, and this is also, I want to lean into a West Virginia specific question here with it. But you've seen the evolution of the Big 12 of spread them and shred them, a lot of 10 personnel, 4 wides, 1 back, a lot of air raid. It probably peaked 2015, 2016. It was a 5-6 year stretch where, I remember one year, I think it was in 16, Cody, we faced in 3 consecutive games the number 1 offense in the country, number 2, and number 3. I think 2 of those were Baker and Mahomes. But that's not the nature of this league anymore. The defenses responded, so did the offenses, whether it was the K-States or the Iowa States, saying, hey, we're going to punch you in the mouth. We're going to go multiple tight ends. We're going to beef up and go physical, because what you've done defensively to counter those spread offenses, first it was the 4-2-5, and then teams started leaning into different versions of the stack, whether it's the Oklahoma State version that was used with Jim Knowles there, or whether it was the Iowa State used version that's still used by Heacock. Of course, Gibby used it here at West Virginia. So where do we find ourselves now? What I'm going to ask you, Utah's coming into the league. They'll punch you in the mouth. They're a physical brand. West Virginia is leaning in to be a physical brand. Oklahoma State, K-State. I think of these teams, there's a lot of physicality in this league, just at large, but more specifically compared to 6-7 years ago. It's not your granddad's Big 12. It's not your dad's Big 12. What does it take defensively in this new Big 12? Oklahoma and Texas off to the SEC, 4 newbies from the Pac-12. Still some physicality here to win defensively. What do you think it takes in the Big 12, and how close is West Virginia to having what it takes defensively to win in the Big 12?
I think the Big 12 is probably more closely related to what we're seeing in the NFL than any other league. And I say that because you can go from a 12 personnel one set, and then now the next thing you're in 11 personnel, and the next thing you're in a 10 personnel, and you have to be able to defend everything. So your defense has to be multiple. And I think really what it comes down to is your teaching processes. Do you have enough scheme to answer a lot of these issues? Do you know when to use the scheme? That's probably the biggest important thing. Now, and don't get me wrong, like the SEC has some really good offenses. They got some really good, but a lot of times it's a much more, I would call it cleaner game, in the sense that it's more uniform. Everybody's kind of a Nick Saban guy for the most part, or they all run.
There's a template.
Right. There's a template in the SEC that you use. And I think the Big 12, because of the Midwest, really, you go and you want to watch really good football, go watch the Missouri Valley Conference with, North Dakota State, North Dakota, South Dakota State, South Dakota, all those schools in that area up there. They're running 12 personnel on almost every single down. And I think that there's something to it with Iowa State finally being like, why aren't we doing that? K-State, which comes from the North Dakota State tree, saying, why can't we just go ahead and run that? You have a former D3 Whitewater, land of, as Aranda would say, land of the power forward Wisconsin guys, just these big old Vikings that all live in Wisconsin. It's like, they're running a power football scheme, but now they have essentially a dual threat quarterback, and they're adding that kind of option. They have a really cool offense to run. Utah is joining. They are a 12 personnel. They are a very static defense that does not care that that they're a 4-2 cover 3 team. They are going to hit you and hit you as hard as they possibly can. And I think to win in the Big 12 now, you have to be physical on defense. It's not a finesse game anymore. This isn't a quarterback. You're not seeing the Art Briles 10 personnel, 11 personnel, choice route everywhere. You still see that a bit, but even even Texas Tech is running 12 personnel stuff. Who would have ever thought 10 years ago that you would see Tech with 2 tight ends on the field? You just never would have thought of it. So, I think you're seeing an evolution within the Big 12 that matches really what a lot of is going on in football, which is we need to have a blocking tight end. We need to then have a move tight end, somebody that we can get moving. We can line him out wide. He's basically kind of your small forward in basketball, right? Like, he's going to go get jump balls. He's good in the red zone. But then I've got a guy that can be more or less anchored to the line and allow that guy to move. It's funny. We talked about Orangeburg and studies, but like all of this, we went through this evolution in the 80s. This is Joe Gibbs and the H-back and the move tight end to let your guys.
The counter tray.
Yes, and all of this stuff. So it's just funny. But we are in the post-spread era. So we're not going backwards like we did in the night after Tampa 2 days, where everybody just said, forget it. Let's go play three yards in a cloud of dust. And we slowly slog through Neanderthal ball to where we are now. We're not going to go back. I think people understand now it's much more efficient to pass the ball. You run to win. You don't win by running, right? I think I think most people understand that now. And so defensively, and I think the biggest misnomer and the biggest misunderstanding for people that are not around the game or like embedded in it like I am is that fitting the run has never stopped as a premium for defense. It's just there are so many different things that you have to deal with in the passing game. And a lot of times, even from like Mike McDonald, who's now with the Seahawks, all the way down to Kirby Smart with Georgia, will tell you have to stop the run first in order and with as little numbers as possible to allocate that. And so your run fits still matter, and offenses are, like you talked about, are challenging you to fit those things. I think we're going to see an evolution back to more of an even front mentality as more teams go to 12 personnel, more teams, try and get you with gap scheme, just like I talked about earlier in the podcast about the angles with that. So to me, I think if you're looking at it, it's like, what does West Virginia have to do to be great on defense? I think you're completely right. You have to be have a blue collar mentality in that front seven. You need to have a premier edge rusher, and then you better have 2 good corners. And your nickel defender has to be elite as well. And so that's kind of where you look at it. If you really want to look, there's a reason why, like, all of a sudden, why is Alabama so good on defense is because, yes, they have premium players, but look where the premium players are coming from. They're coming from edge rusher. They're coming from nickel, outside corner. Those are the guys, interior defensive linemen, if you're going to play a 4-down. So to me, it's like, where can we be successful is finding a nickel, finding 2 corners that can really play, having one guy on the front that's a problem. Because I think if you can find one, then you'll be fine. And I think that's kind of where you're at. And then protecting him in the run game so that he's not just getting hammered all the time.
Those nickels are now making running back money in the NFL.
Oh,
that's where that running back money's going. No,
and that's the thing. Really, I've kind of shifted more towards the NFL. in terms of coverage, I do still do a lot of, college football, especially Power 5. But I think with the NFL, you're really seeing we're finally in an era of NFL where it's actually interesting again. You've got multiple different trees on offense, you got multiple different trees on defense, but you're seeing in the economy of it, I think it really illustrates because and I think the economy of it will trickle down to the college level at some point, because now with NIL money, everything, you're basically given a salary cap and you've got to allocate that money where it needs to go. And so I think a lot of college teams in the past couple of years, I've noticed this when I've gone to the combine and when I've just kind of visited other college coaches, is that you're really seeing a lot of them send their player personnel guys to the NFL to go get ideas and bring back to how do we run a salary cap? Because it used to just be in recruiting, you were just kind of like, hey, we'll start you early or we'll get you hooked up here. You won't have to live in the door. I mean, you're just trying to throw little stuff out there. And then now it's like, look, it's about the money. It's like, hey, where are we going to allocate that money? And I think nickel, I think outside corner, edges. In fact, if you go look at NFL teams for the most part, and it's really stood out for a couple of teams this year, is you collect edge rushers, you collect corners, and then you kind of move guys around if you need to. That guy, he ate that biscuit. He ain't a biscuit, away from being an interior. Okay, we'll move you to quick 3 technique. We'll move you back inside. Or, hey, that corner's a little slower than we thought, but he's really physical. It's moving to safety. The Jimmy Johnson stuff is coming back. I think where colleges are going to have to, we're going to collect
3 stuff, yeah.
Yes, and we're going to collect these guys and we're going to start moving them around, because I think that's what you're going to have to do. But back to your point of paying in the NFL, running backs money is not there, but you're allocating it somewhere else. And a lot of times what you're seeing is the nickel defender. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago. We are literally in the golden era of nickel, and they're all drafted within the past 3 years. And we have some of the best nickels that we've ever seen. And a lot of it has to do with what's going on at the college level. It's now part of the structure. You have to have a guy that can play near the box and can cover and is cerebral, and he's essentially the key cog in your defense because he connects everything.
Every offense in the world is around 11 personnel more than running anything. So why wouldn't you need a nickel? Cody, we have a guy on staff, and I was thinking of him, Wes. I'm sure you were as well, as you were describing everything you just said. Neil Brown has a guy on staff. This is his second year, Drew Fabianich. He was the national director of scouting for the Cowboys for 18 years. Longtime NFL guy, incredible eye for talent. And he is the guy in the building superintending those decisions, those choices, the extra set of eyes. He basically runs the entire scouting department. Under that's the high school scouting division.
Yeah.
I mean, aren't we living in the future right now at West Virginia with Drew Fabianich? Everybody's going to have to do that.
I 100% agree. I think that you have to have a guy that at least can teach you how the NFL is running it and then fit it to what your model is that you need. I think now that's that's going to become the norm. I think eventually what we're going to see with the NCAA is they're going to have, I think colleges will be able to start choosing who they want to recruit and who they want to stay as a coach. And I think you're going to lose. I don't think, if you ask any coach right now, a lot of them that are true coaches that really want to coach, they don't want to recruit. They're gone from their family for 6 weeks, 8 weeks out of the year, gone, not home, especially at a place like West Virginia where you have to recruit nationally. You can't just go in your back. I live in Texas. Literally, where I live in Dallas, within a 50-mile radius, there's probably 100 Division I football players. Sure. So it's because I live in South Dallas. So it's called the Golden Triangle.
One being Sonny Dykes, yeah.
Yeah, right. So you know what I mean? So it's when you're in a place like that, you really have to, I think it's smart for West Virginia to have a guy like that to come in and then also build out a scouting side of it. And now that they've kind of alleviated a lot of the restrictions on what guys can do, I think what you're going to see, these quality control guys are going to be your coaches, guys that have been primary recruiters. They're going to kind of lose a little bit of the way that they may not be the guy that's leading the room. They may be the guy that's hey, I'm paying you to get guys in here and recruit. So to me, I think it's going to change the dynamics of coaching as well. In the next, if we have the same conversation 10 years from now, I think it will be very, very interesting to see where we are. It's going to look completely different. I think it's going to look more like an NFL model with a scouting department and a coaching department. And it's like oil and water. Those guys don't mix.
couple of weeks ago, analysts weren't coaching on the field. A couple of years ago, we didn't have OTAs in college. So you are 100% right.
Yeah. Oh, well, and the analyst thing, I mean, I remember like I was a GA and I had to lead like kickoff meetings, right? Because we didn't want, because of compliance issues at Baylor. Like you couldn't have analyst guys coach. Now go to and I'm not saying anything nobody knows. Analysts have been coaching in the college level since there were analysts. Like it's you think sure. Nick Saban's bringing in a former head coach to just sit there and he's going to pay him $150,000, $200,000 to sit there and not talk to a kid. Like it's been happening. Now it's just out in the air. Like you can finally do it, which is good. But I think that's the next step in it. The next step will then be, hey, you are a coach, you are a scouting guy, or you are a recruiter. You can talk. You're basically like you go to the car dealership. You have your finance guy, you got your salesman that's going to get that car, and then you have the guy that signs the paperwork, like that. And so the middle management guy. And so like that's what you're going to have at the college level. And so to hear that West Virginia is doing that and has it built out, that should be a good thing. You guys should be comfortable about that and feel good about that they're building out a staff like that and having a guy that has been in the NFL for as long as that guy has.
Wes?
I think that's a good way to wrap this up. Oh, and my hand hurts from all the notes I've been taking over here this past hour. But Cody, this has been fantastic. I know Jed would like to keep you for another hour, but I think 60 minutes of your time is plenty generous for us here. So before we let you go, just plug it for us and for our listeners. If they want more of you, more of your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, so everything is on matchquarters.com. Subscribe to the site. And then also on top of that, I have a clinic archive. I've got my regular archive where you can find all my articles I've written. There's a really good search tool within matchquarters.com. Just use that. I've also written 6 books. Like I already mentioned, hybrids. But if you're interested in any of this stuff, I've got 6 books. I'm sure one you can find that you'd be interested in. I try really hard to make it to where it's kind of like we talked today, explaining it in as simplest terms as I possibly can. So everything you need, you can find at matchquarters.com. That's where I would start.
We got a lot of high school coaches that listen, and I would strongly encourage the high school coaches listening here. Yeah, check out the website, matchquarters.com. You're going to want to purchase 1, 2, or more of those books. It's I've followed your articles for, I don't remember how many years now, Cody, but keep up the great work. And we can't thank you enough for sharing some of your time here with Mountaineer Nation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. And like you said, we've been talking for a couple of years now. And so it's glad to finally get together and make this thing happen. So I appreciate it.
We'll have to do it again next offseason and, recap a great year for the WVU defense here, obviously. But for Cody Alexander of matchquarters.com, for our producer, Skylar Callahan, the runaway beer truck, Owen Schmidt, he's the signal caller, Jed Drenning. I'm Wes Euler. The one thing we ask of you before we go is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.